Welcome to the Silent Thinking Podcast, a space to slow down, breathe, and reconnect. Today, I'm reading From the Way of the 3-Year-Old Why by Donn. Just listen and let the stillness support you. Chapter 3, The Second 3-Year-Old Guideline, Saturday, May 20. "Oh, honey, I'm home," Dan called as he came through the front door in his bad Ricky Ricardo imitation. In the bedroom, Grace rolled her eyes but smiled, though he could see neither. In their 30 years together, despite all the challenges with hope and health and uncertain income, some things were predictable. That included the silly greeting from the front door that Dan never tired of. Grace pretended his puns and lame jokes left her groaning. 10 years into their marriage, they had irritated her the way fingernails on a chalkboard do, and she had to work to love him despite the annoyance. Now it reminded her of their deep love. "I'm in here," she called, as if she would be anywhere else. That, too, had become a ritual, though only in recent years. Dan appeared in the doorway, holding a box behind him. "Close your eyes and hold out your hands." She squenched her eyes shut tight and held her hands out. Before opening them again, she felt all around the cardboard box he handed her, exploring its texture, feeling the tape and the address label. She opened her eyes, looked surprised and said, "It's a box." "Of course it's a box, silly. Open it." Dan always opened packages with great care, as if he intended to reuse the box and even the tape. But Grace's enthusiasm moved faster. She cut right through the packaging tape with scissors and began removing bubble wrap and instructional material. Finally, she held up the prize. A graphics tablet and a pen with 3 nibs and a cable to hook it to a computer. "I got the padded grip for the pen too, to help with your arthritis. I know you would rather draw or paint than use the trackball, so I thought this might help. When did you get this? Remember when I left to get the mail yesterday after Hope came out of surgery? I knew this had arrived, and I wanted to surprise you with it." She held the pad in one hand and the pen in the other, squealed and said, "Come here for a hug." Then crawled up on the bed and hugged her as best he could without tipping them both over. She smiled at him and then said, "Now, get me my laptop. I have some drawing to do." She began humming to herself in happiness, reading the instructions, while Dan set up her bed table. "I'm going to run to the to work a bit, if that's okay," he said. "Sure. I have a ton of stuff to get out of my head, and this will keep me busy for a while." He quietly closed the door behind him as Grace plugged cables, her isolation for the moment forgotten. Not again, Dan thought. It's always something. He scanned the email with the subject line, "Sorry to cancel," then read it more slowly. They had canceled the Zoom workshop on Friday because of an urgent all-hands company problem. Apologies, etc. And could we reschedule? Then sighed. One more situation out of his control, but affecting his income. Time to brainstorm some opportunities. He pulled out his red sketch pad and pen, wrote prospects in a circle in the middle of a page, and started thinking about people he knew who might need a workshop for their managers. Problem? Then recognized Kelly's contralto behind him, but he hadn't seen her approach. She never startled him, but he never saw her until she said something. How did she do that? He guessed his work so captivated him that he didn't notice people around him. Yeah, just let the gig fall through. It wasn't a large fee, but every bit helps these days. It just makes it hard to predict income, but I guess every small business has that issue. "Do you mind if I sit down? I'm not starting work for a few minutes." "Sure, pull up a chair. What's on your mind?" She pulled one of the beaten-up wooden chairs around to the side of his table and propped her chin on her fist. "I'm interested in the creative process, so I just wondered how you got started with speaking. Then noticed a script tattoo in Greek on the inside of her right wrist. Remembering his brief foray into Koine Greek, he thought, poiesis, making or creating something that really fits. Are you thinking of pursuing speaking? She smiled. Maybe. I've had some pretty good training in the craft already, but I'm just curious about all sorts of creativity. I don't know of too many speakers who set as a life goal becoming a speaker. For sure, I never intended to be a speaker, he said. He put down his sketchpad and pen, looked up at the ceiling as if his memories played on a screen up there, and smiled. I actually won the first speech contest I ever entered back in college. Really? She said. That's impressive. Not really, he said. I entered the after-dinner speaking category, and I was the only contestant. They laughed together. Then Dan continued. The win meant little, but the experience showed me I could enjoy speaking. Even then, I experienced what other people called stage fright as energy. I took every opportunity after that. Other people rode roller coaster or went to scary movies to get a thrill. I spoke. Kelly rubbed her chin, her eyebrows coming together in thought. If you hadn't intended to be a speaker, why did you enter that contest to begin with? Dan smiled. I intended to work in journalism. Start working at the newspapers when I was 14 years old and wrote my first fiction stories when I was 11 or 12. I loved reading and I loved writing. All my English teachers, especially Mrs. Fortner in high school, encouraged me to write. Journalism was a way to make a living of sorts with writing. But the little liberal arts college I went to didn't have a journalism major, just a general communication major. It was the closest I could get. So I received solid training in journalism and writing. But I also had to dig into interpersonal communication, small group communication, public speaking, communication theory, and all kinds of related academic stuff. He leaned in as if sharing something in confidence. Oddly, my English professor ran the contest, not my speech professor. I still don't know for sure what that might mean. Kelly chuckled again. So why did you end up speaking instead of writing? It's a long story. I'm on my break. How about if I get us fresh coffee and pull up a chair? Never one to turn down coffee, Dan readily agreed. He had hit a dead end on his marketing anyway, and he knew he needed to walk away from it for a while. Kelly returned, carrying steaming mugs of coffee, featuring the Blissful Bean logo, hers filled with jet black brew, and Dan's sweetened with plenty of cream and a shot of vanilla, just as he liked. How do you know how customers like their coffee? He asked. Most people tart up their own except for the shot of flavor. You are not customers to me, or at least not just customers, she said. You're friends, people I care about. I just notice what people do with their coffee after I serve it to them. For me, it's almost like serving communion. Interesting. You know, one of my frequent saying is connection before content. It doesn't mean the content doesn't matter. It means that without the connection, the content won't matter. I think you embody that concept. Thanks, she said. Now about that, why speaking instead of writing thing? Right. Well, that's a good question with layers of answers. The two go together well. Speakers learn that writing a book is a great way for them to market their speaking. Writers, especially authors, learn that speaking is a great way to market their books. Speaking is also a great way to build other kinds of businesses. It's one of the most effective ways of drawing attention to your accounting service, law practice, consulting service, you name it. Heck, one of the highest paid and best known professional speakers got started by using speaking to build her hairdressing business. Hairdressing. That's certainly a creative business, but you rarely associate it with speaking. She learned to tell stories in making conversation with clients, why they say in her chair, and expanded from there. Back in the early 90s, I started speaking because there was some demand for my topic, and it could lead to an immediate paycheck. I wrote regularly for a business publication, which led to a steady paycheck, but other kinds of writing often had a long lag time. Before the internet, a lot of freelance writing happened through old-fashioned postal mail. You probably don't remember that. It might surprise you what I remember. Let's just say I understand the concept, but tell me how you actually worked then. I wrote a lot of small special interest and regional magazines. The process involves sending a query letter to an editor, waiting a few weeks for a response, doing the research, writing the piece, mailing it in, waiting for it to be published in a few months, and then waiting another month or two for the check to come in the mail. But I found out that I could speak and get paid almost immediately. Then shook his head, then continued. There were still delays. More companies and associations would contract with a speaker 6 months or even a year ahead of time. But I could ask for a deposit up front to hold the date, and I could get paid within 30 days of giving the speech. Sometimes they would hand me a check right then. Kelly took a sip, looked thoughtful, and said, "So it was just driven by economics?" "Not entirely. I enjoyed the energy of getting up on a stage, the feeling that came when I saw the light bulbs go on for audience members, when I would see them engage with the material and know I was making a difference." Was it always like that feeling? Oh no. Sometimes what usually felt like energy felt like fear. I think that's what many people experience when they label it stage fright. At those times, I would ask myself, why I ever consider speaking a good idea, and I would vow never to do it again. Other times, I just could not connect with the audience. Then smiled at a memory playing back in his mind. Once, I spoke for an in-service at a high school, presenting powerful ideas for engaging with students, and ironically, having trouble reaching them. The coaches attended only because the principal required it. They all sat in the back 2 rows and read newspapers and chatted the whole time I talked. Those times made me want to give up. But most of the time, I got such a charge out of the speaking that I would have done it for free. Kelly looked directly in his eyes and said, "Do you still get that feeling?" There was a long pause. Then started to speak, but then Kelly said, "Oops, I overstayed my break, got around. Thanks for the visit. We'll talk more later." She gathered the empty cups and headed off behind the counter. Before disappearing around the corner, she turned and said, "I gotta wonder though, even if you still get that feeling, is it different from the feeling you get from writing?" He blinked and she was gone, leaving Dan to wonder by himself. His cell phone chimed, signaling a text from Grace. "Pick up Hope's meds on the way home, and Liana needs to leave a little early, so could you come on home, please?" He looked at the time on the screen, realized the coffee shop would close soon, and soon after the pharmacy would as well. It looked as if brainstorming prospects would have to wait. This wasn't the first time he had to stop work to step in when a nurse suddenly needed to take care of something at their own home. He knew he needed to pack up soon, but he also needed to think a bit. He pulled out his sketchbook, turned to a fresh page, and wrote, "Charge out of speaking," in the middle. Ideas flowed quickly, surfacing a variety of experiences over the years. After only about 3 minutes, he paused and looked over the whole page. He focused on one particular leg that helped him realize when the spark had gone out of speaking for him. He lost it about the time Hope spent 3 long weeks in the hospital fighting off RSV when she was about 15. Respiratory syncytial virus. What a mouthful. Dan had never heard of it, but when Hope's lungs started filling up like tubs with jello, he learned a lot quickly. In adults, RSV might cause a common cold, but in the elderly and infants, it can quickly lead to pneumonia and death. Most teenagers would have moved beyond the danger zone, but Hope's special needs left her as vulnerable as an infant. To move of his memory took him back to one particular night during that stay. RSV patients filled half the hospital rooms, and an aura of anxiety surrounded by the entire building. Bleary, red-eyed parents wandered the halls at all hours, taking advantage of the free coffee on each floor to help them stay awake for their children. As Dan walked through the hall on the way to Hope's room, he could glimpse through open doors of patients, siblings, whole families gathered around small beds and cribs, murmuring among themselves. Every cluster surrounded a frail, still figure in the middle. Pulse oximeters beep everywhere, with many of them singing the song of their people, as one respiratory tech called the low oxygen alarms, and nurses scrambled to deal with them all. When he reached Hope's room, he found the doctor, a nurse he didn't recognize, and the hospital chaplain along with Grace. Back then, Hope still moved occasionally, turning her head to follow a voice or pulling her arm away when a phlebotomist tried once again to find a vein that had not been so scared by IVS as to be unusable. Today, she lay still as a sack of sand, unresponsive to anything going on in the room. Mr. Roberts, I know this is a hard conversation to have, the unfamiliar nurse said, and we are certainly not giving up hope. But we think it might be a good time for us to talk a little about whether, if it comes down to it, whether you and Mrs. Roberts would want to donate any of Hope's organs. She talked more, but Dan didn't really couldn't hear her. He looked over at Grace, teary-eyed, saying nothing, looking right back at him. He took Hope's hand, the one without the ivy in the back, and squeezed it, though he received no squeeze back. They had talked before about the need to be realistic about Hope's chances, about the likelihood that at some point her condition would no longer be compatible with life in cold, clinical terminology they had heard since her birth. Twice before, they had thought she had reached that stage, but it had never felt so imminent. The rest of that night blurred into fog. What he remembered, the empty, hollow feeling in his chest that acted as a drain for concern about anything other than keeping his daughter alive. He kept working, of course. They still needed to pay the bills. They also needed to keep the insurance that provided quality medical care beyond the minimum that state Medicaid would provide. But they also needed to avoid earning more than what would qualify her for state Medicaid. Hope's primary insurance did not cover the home nursing care that kept her protected from infections in hospital rooms full of other children. In other words, to keep the coverage necessary for Hope's survival, the state prohibited Dan from practicing financial responsibility, like earning more money and growing savings. Dan kept pursuing speaking gigs because that's what he did, but his heart was no longer in it. He shook his head to clear it, remembered he had to get to the pharmacy before it closed. As much as he liked the disruptions to his schedule, memories of worse times made him grateful he could still have such disruptions. The only way to have complete control over his time involved a loss he didn't want to contemplate. As he closed up his laptop, he picked up the receipt for his coffee, paused, and checked the back. No note today. Slightly disappointed, he kept packing, then gathered the trash as he started to toss the napkins and such in the garbage. He noticed a brightly colored note card between two of them. Pulling it out, he saw a crayon drawing of a chicken on the front. He opened the note, which said, "Why did the chicken cross the road?" "To get to another side." But nobody ever asked why the chicken wanted to cross the road. Did he have hungry chicks over there? Was he being chased by Colonel Sanders? The rest of the sentence says, "to get to another side so that." You may have noticed 3-year-olds keep asking why. Look for the "so that." No signature, but the same elegant handwriting as the previous note. Dan looked around, but saw no one else around this close to closing time, except for Jim, who was always there, sipping coffee and reading an ever-present book. Jim looked up and nodded in recognition, then went back to reading. He hadn't seen the note earlier among the napkins. When did it show up? If it hadn't come from Kelly, the note writer must have overheard their conversation on Wednesday. Maybe Jim. If so, the handwriting certainly didn't fit, although appearances deceive. Dan pulled out his red sketchbook and turned to the page where he had written the first guideline. He wrote, "The second guideline, look for the "so that." A 3-year-old doesn't stop with the first answer. He still wants to know why. What's the outcome? Is paying the bills enough so that? Dan thought. It would have to wait right now. He had a date at a pharmacy. Thank you for sharing this quiet moment with me. If this brought you peace, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like the video, and share it with someone who might need a little stillness too. Until next time, keep listening inward.